Devola and Popola, two sisters carrying a burden that not many can bear. Although these two characters don't have much screen time in the Nier series, they are absolutely pivotal to the overarching plot. In this video, I want to analyze Devola and Popola's actions and talk about the burdens they carry. I also want to take some of the things they go through and relate it to things that we go through today. Now, I'm going to try my best to sum up the lore of Nier and the backstory of Devola and Popola, so if I miss something, feel free to correct me in the comments below. Devola and Popola are android models that were created to oversee Project Gestalt. This project involves separating a person's soul from their body in an attempt to save the human race from a disease known as the white chlorination syndrome, which originated from the events that occurred at the end of Drakengard 3. The original plan was to reunite the human souls, which became known as Gestalts, with their soulless human bodies once the white chlorination syndrome has been completely eradicated from the earth. These soulless vessels were known as replicants, being empty shells created from the genetic data of humans. However, as the years went by, the replicants started to become sentient, which caused their corresponding gestalts to relapse, leading to the gestalts becoming hostile. In Nier Replicant, these relapsed gestalts are called shades, and as a result of the relapse, the replicants caught a disease called the Black Scrawl, which over time would eventually kill them. Relapses then became more frequent due to more replicants becoming self-aware, causing the Black Scrawl to spread at a rapid rate. As stated earlier, Devola and Popola's role in all of this was not just to act as observers for the project, but to protect the original Gestalt so that he can continue to keep the other Gestalts stable. In the game, the original Gestalt is known as the Shadow Lord, and at the end of the game we find out that the Shadow Lord is the Gestalt of the main protagonist, Nier. During the events of Nier Replicant, the original Gestalt, being the original Nier, started to act out of line and grow impatient with the project's progress. This led to him kidnapping the replicant Yona in hopes of saving his Yona, setting the replicant Nier on his quest for vengeance, and causing Devola and Popola to intervene. Unfortunately, Devola and Popola failed to stop Nier's replicant from killing the Shadow Lord. As a result of the Shadow Lord's death, Project Gestalt failed, and within 1,000 years, humanity became completely extinct. Because Devola and Popola failed to keep the project alive, they were the ones blamed for humanity's extinction. As punishment, their android models were discontinued everywhere, all except for one pair, which is the pair we meet in Nier Automata. Now, this pair specifically was meant to go free, but their memories of Project Gestalt were completely wiped. It's not really explained in the game, but I think the reason why this pair went free was to serve as a reminder for the rest of the androids why Project Gestalt failed in the first place. The reason why I think this is because everywhere they go, they're resented and treated as outcasts. When we meet them in the resistance camp, we learn that the androids in the camp forced them to perform the most dangerous tasks as punishment for the sins of their ancestors. Because of this, they also had to fight a lot, despite the fact that they're not combat models. It's also revealed later that these twins were programmed to generate constant feelings of guilt and shame, which is why they accepted all the abuse they received and felt like they needed to atone, even though they didn't know what to atone for, and even though they didn't do anything wrong. Now, this is one of the burdens I want to touch on: the burden of guilt. Feelings of guilt, shame, and condemnation can weigh heavily on a person's mind. Not just that, but it can also affect how you live your daily life. The Devola and Popola models in Automata were hardwired to carry this burden on them wherever they went, even though they specifically had nothing to do with the downfall of Project Gestalt. What's interesting though is that despite Devola being a little on edge at first, the twins in Automata seem to be more gentle in comparison to the versions of the twins we see in Replicant. Maybe it's just me, but that's how I see it, and I think the contrast between them comes down to the different burdens they carry. And although the burdens might be different, the one thing that makes all Devola and Popola similar is their sworn sense of duty. The twins in Replicant were administrators of Project Gestalt, given the responsibility responsibility to save the human race, the greatest burden of all. This caused them to have to keep up a facade with the replicants, but when Nier and the others made their way to the Shadow Lord's castle, they were blunt and straight to the point when telling Nier the harsh truth, not showing any signs of holding back from doing their duty. The twins in Automata were outcasts who carried the burden of guilt and were treated like scraps at the bottom of the barrel, but because of their burden, they came off as more kind and genuine, and this didn't hold them back from performing their duty to atone. Now again, we're talking about two different Devola and Popolas here, but both sets of twins had the weight of the world on their shoulders. One pair was tasked with carrying the literal weight of the world, while the other pair was programmed to feel the weight of the world. And if you've ever felt a strong sense of guilt at any point in your life, you know what this feels like. Guilt can lead to things like depression and anxiety, and even though Devola and Popola were androids, we can kind of see in their backstory in Automata that this is something they struggled with. However, I believe that something as negative as guilt can also be used for good, because it can drive you to become better. In Automata, we see this in Devola and Popola's final stand when helping 9S get into the tower. My favorite part about all of this is when A2 shows up after the twins sacrifice themselves for 9S. Devola asks A2 if they managed to help, and A2 says, "You did." And that right there is all the closure they needed to fully atone. They wanted to do the right thing, just like the Devola and Popola models in Replicant. Now I know earlier I said the twins in Nier Automata seemed to be a little more gentle and kind than the twins in Nier Replicant, but don't get me wrong, the Devola and Popola twins in Replicant absolutely demonstrated compassion and kindness to everyone. They were the leaders of the village, they took care of the replicants and gave them a place to live. Now of course their main objective of trying to save humanity hasn't changed, but you can tell they definitely cared for the replicants, especially for Nier. But if you ask me, this became one of their biggest burdens, the burden of attachment. Now, I'm someone who genuinely believes that Devola and Popola didn't do anything wrong. I think that even through their betrayal to Nier and hiding the truth from everyone, in the long run they were doing the right thing if it meant saving humanity. However, doing the right thing doesn't mean you can't make mistakes along the way, and I believe their biggest mistake was getting too attached to the replicants. If your goal is to save humanity, you cannot afford to get attached to the beings that are serving as the soulless shells for the real humans. Attachment isn't always a bad thing, but in the case of Devola and Popola, attachment becomes a burden for them. At the end of the game, when they force themselves to fight Nier, you can tell that the burden is weighing down on them because they even say that they really don't want to do this. And Nier doesn't want to fight the twins either because he even says that they were like parents to him. Again, getting attached isn't a bad thing, but sometimes it can halt us from moving forward with our true purpose. And I know it's much easier said than done, but doing the right thing sometimes might mean you have to make some sacrifices and do some things you don't want to do. I mean, sure, maybe making Kaine and Emil sleep outside was a little much, but honestly, if it means saving humanity, then I would have done the same thing. And I know that sounds really harsh, but maybe Popola did this on purpose because she wanted Nier to start to resent her a bit. And if the twins could spark some friction between Nier and themselves, then maybe it'll cause them to become less attached to Nier and the others. The more attached they become to the replicants, the harder it'll be for them to succeed in their mission of saving humanity. What this honestly reminds me of is The Last of Us. And yes, since I'm bringing it up, there will be major spoilers for The Last of Us 1, so if you haven't played it and don't want to be spoiled, I recommend skipping to the timestamp listed below. In The Last of Us 1, we find out that Ellie is immune to the infection that has been ravaging the US and causing people to turn into these zombie-like creatures. At the end of the game, Joel and Ellie make their way to a hospital in Salt Lake City, where the Fireflies tell Joel that in order to create a cure for the worldwide infection, they need to extract the infected part of Ellie's brain, which will kill her in the process. However, Joel has become so attached to Ellie that she became like a daughter to him. And if you know how this game starts out, you know that Joel can't afford to go through this kind of pain a second time. At the end of the game, Joel chooses to fight his way through the hospital and escape with Ellie, killing multiple people along the way. Joel's attachment to Ellie is what prevented the world from acquiring a cure to an incurable disease. Joel could have let Ellie die if it meant saving the world, but at the same time he couldn't have, because he became too attached. With Devola and Popola, at least they tried to stop Nier in the end. They didn't let their attachment to him prevent them from attempting to do what needed to be done, but it just made it a little bit harder for them. Unfortunately for Devola and Popola, they failed, thus leading to humanity's extinction. Now, I'm not saying don't get attached to things, but what I am saying is don't get attached to the wrong things, because attachment in the long run can sometimes do more harm than good. Devola and Popola have been through a lot during their time in these two games, but one of the heaviest burdens of all that we see the twins carry is the burden of loneliness. We especially see Popola experience this as Devola is dying in her arms after their battle with Nier. Through everything they've been through, they've always had each other. Devola even says that she thinks the reason why they were created as twins was because being androids, they don't have souls, and that this world is too lonely for people without a soul. In Nier Automata, after the twins sacrifice themselves to help 9S, Pod 153 poses a question. Why did Devola and Popola prefer death over surviving alone? There was a high probability that at least one of them could have made it out alive. It's simply because they can't live without each other. Whether it's the Devola and Popola from Replicant or Automata, one thing that's for certain is that the burdens they had to carry on their backs were too much for just one person to handle alone. That's why they were created as twins, because they can relate to and rely on each other when the going gets tough. Being responsible for making sure humanity survives seems like it would do a number on you over the years, but if you have someone to walk side by side with you through thick and thin, it makes the weight feel a little lighter. And something encouraging to take away from this is we don't have to go through life alone. Life can be tough and sometimes overbearing, but there's always someone out there who's either going through what you're going through or have already experienced the very trial you're facing. If you're struggling, don't be afraid to ask for help. We all need it. Sometimes I try to do so much on my own when I don't have to. And it's sad that with Devola and Popola, although they had each other, there was no one else to turn to for help. I mean, sure, there was other Devola and Popola models out there in other areas of the world, but we never actually hear of them contacting the other models. It's just them and no one else to turn to. That's also why Popola is basically driven to insanity after Devola's death, because the weight of the world is too much for her to bear on her own, and there's no one else who is capable of understanding what it feels like to carry such a heavy burden. After I finished Nier Replicant, Devola and Popola honestly became my favorite characters in the game, because they went through so much behind the scenes that we don't even know about. Tasked with overseeing Project Gestalt in hopes to save mankind, they were literally carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, and I would argue this responsibility alone makes them two of the strongest characters in Nier. Now, everyone who knows me knows that I'm a Christian, and when thinking of Devola and Popola, I can't help but think of Jesus. Jesus came as a man, took the weight of the world, being our sin, upon himself on the cross, died the death we deserved, and resurrected 3 days later, conquering sin and death. Because of what Jesus did, salvation is available for humanity. Devola and Popola also carried this weight of saving humanity on their shoulders, but unfortunately, they're not perfect. They failed to stop Nier, which led to humanity's doom. But what I love the most about Devola and Popola is that even though they failed their mission, they still did whatever it took to prevent mankind from going extinct. As I said earlier, I don't believe they intended to do anything wrong, but I think the weight they carried might have become too heavy to bear, even with the two of them, and this eventually led to them not being able to perform their task in the most effective way. If there's one thing I've learned from observing Devola and Popola, it's this. If you're in a place in your life where you feel like everything is on you, if you feel like you're carrying the weight of the world, just know that you don't have to carry it alone. Everyone is carrying something, and imagine how much nicer the world would be if we were all willing to share the weight and decided to run this race together. In conclusion, I believe there's always a much deeper story to be told with characters like Devola and Popola once you look into the hardships they might have experienced, and by connecting with these characters, you can relate to them. And even if they're just fictional characters in a video game, the things they deal with are very real, and can help each and every one of us to realize that we're not alone in our faults and in our struggles. Devola, Popola, you really did manage to help us. Thank you.